All right, Sydney, looking at your essay, in your introduction, you don't really have a strong thesis. If you look at the prompt says, analyze how each poet uses literary devices to make his point. So what you really need to do in your position statement is articulate what Richard Wilbur's point is and what Billy Collins' point is. So something along the lines of, while Richard Wilbur seems to think lying to children is okay in order to keep them calm, Billy Collins makes the opposite point, or Billy Collins seems to think that that lying is a dangerous thing to do, something like that. But you need to be very, very specific about the point that the poet is making in your position statement. It'll make everything else in the essay easier. Okay, let me look at your body paragraphs. All right, I think the way that you organized the paragraphs is fine, dealing with the beginning of each poem and then the change in tone for each poem. Something to think about is whether it would have been easier for you or made more sense for you if you had done a paragraph on the barred owl and then a paragraph on the history teacher. Just something to think about as you organize yourself before you start writing. In this first paragraph, there are times where you could put in more specific, concrete details. Here's an example. The speaker is doing this in order to create a friendly persona for the owl rather than a nightmare, which is described later in the poem. What you could have said instead of a nightmare is, you could have said something about, the eaten raw or the dark branch rather than the bird on the dark branch eating its prey raw, which is described later in the poem. And you wouldn't even need to say which is described later in the poem if you're using a quote from later in the poem. The transition to the history teacher is pretty good. And I do like that you're using these nice short little quotes. I think that's very appropriate. In your second body paragraph, same basic concept. I think you sort of undermine your discussion of the history teacher. You really only have this one paragraph here, so you're kind of underselling Collins' point. And referencing what the children are actually doing, it'd be nice if you pointed out that you recognize what they're actually doing. The fact that they're mussing up their hair and breaking their glasses, which is inappropriate behavior and possibly a result of the lying that the history teacher did to them. I'm going to look at your conclusion and I'll be right back. Your conclusion makes your essay sound finished, and that's good. You do seem to be bringing up some new points in this idea about not shielding them from reality forever. Also, perhaps, they're very different in what they're comparing is not an idea you've brought up before. But the essay sounds finished, and ultimately, in a timed writing, that's what you need out of your conclusion. I do think you make your point. I think it's a little superficial, so this essay is probably a 5. Thanks.